and welcome to another fantastic Gnomon Industry Live event here live at the Dell stage. Tonight we're thrilled to welcome two amazing artists from Halon Entertainment, Casey Pyke and Wesley Kreiger. The duo will walk through their work on Kingdom of Planet of the Apes, from Previs and Postvis to using motion capture with Unreal Engine. They will also cover the company's pipeline for working with different departments, working with talent, and their path from school to the industry. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions, make sure you put them in your notes or you remember them, and we're gonna get as many questions as we can, jam-packed at the very end. But so we can get to that Q&A, so you all enjoy this presentation, help me introduce Casey and Wesley.
Thank you.
All right.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Casey Pyke. I'm the lead visualization supervisor at Halon.
And I'm Wesley Kreiger. I'm the lead VAD artist at Halon.
So we're going to talk to you a little bit about where we came from, how we got into this industry, and then a bunch about how we worked on the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes film. So one of the story about how we kind of started on this Planet of the Apes film comes from kind of two avenues. So we had worked on all of the new Planet of the Apes films from, Rise, Dawn, and War at Halon. And I had the pleasure of working on Dawn and War, and then Kingdom. But those were all with director Matt, or the last two were with director Matt Reeves. And when he finished out his trilogy, it was kind of a question on whether it would come back or not. And I had worked on a film that never got made called Mouse Guard, that got canceled like 2 weeks before they started shooting or something. But we were doing lots and lots of, we did pitch viz, we did previs for these big battle scenes and all this stuff. And the director of that movie was named Wes Ball. And when that movie went down, everybody kind of spread out for a little bit. But about a year later, Wes invited me to lunch, and he was like, I have a secret for you. I'm going to make the new Planet of the Apes movie, and I want you to be with me. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And then COVID happened, and I was like, who knows if this is ever going to happen. But eventually, we got the call that he was putting his kind of pre-production together. And Wes Ball, he did the Maze Runner movies, and he comes from the visual effects field, and he taught himself Unreal Engine, which is one of the programs we use when doing visualization. And he was very, very knowledgeable about Unreal Engine, how to light in it, how to set up sequencers, basically how to do anything in it, which made it kind of difficult to do a bunch of work, push it, and then come back the next morning, and he's like, hey man, I opened up your stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning and moved stuff around and stuff, hope that was okay with you. And we were like, oh no. But he's so creative and so technically oriented as well, that working with him is very highly collaborative, and a cool experience once you get past the freak out of the director going in and messing with your files. But yeah, he brought us in to do a pitch viz, which is previs, but before you get a green light for your movie, when you have to kind of prove to the studio that you're making a movie that people want to see, and and to get the budget that you need for your movie, to either get the green light to make the movie, or at least the green light to continue on with pre-production, so that you can get previs going, get storyboards, get costumes, all of this stuff kind of running, so that eventually you can get a full green light from the studio. So we worked on that for about 2 months, I think, and it was a version of the egg climb at the beginning of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and it was a version that I would say about 50% of it was like, didn't change from that version to the movie. And then 50% of it was like completely different by the end. And after we did that, he went off to get his pitch together for the studios and stuff, and we were just waiting. We did a couple other projects in between there, and then a few months later, he was like, "All right, guys, we got the green light. Let's go." The things that we did on it was Virtual Art Department work, PitchViz, Previs, and Postvis. Previs is kind of what you saw there, kind of video game quality, kind of rough animation, but like the cameras and everything are kind of telling the story, which would be a blueprint for what to film on the day, or at least what to jive off of once you get on a set and you're like, oh, this camera's cool, but this other camera would be cooler now that we're in the real environment.
Especially with such a digital movie where, I mean, you're doing a lot of shoots, especially with like your real human characters, but so much of it's going to go back into animation anyway that you got to start somewhere, and planning out your whole movie like this is definitely a great way to save time and save time down the line, and then just get planning.
Yeah, there's also a process that we use called TechViz, which we didn't actually use on this film that much, but on some other films that kind of get more technical, what it is taking the previs and rendering out kind of like God views or a quad view of a scene so that the filmmakers can see like how far and how fast is this person moving, how big of a crane do you need to get this camera move, does this camera have to be on the top of a car driving at like 60 miles an hour, and then there's like safety considerations, we can't actually drive the car at 60 miles an hour, so can we see what it would look like at 25 miles an hour, and then it's like, and try to make it look exciting, those kinds of things are notes that we get to try to refine kind of the filmmaking, the vision of the filmmaking to try to fit into what's realistic, which is kind of a constant goal during Previs, but TechViz is specifically getting all that information, the production.
Especially as more productions are using like virtual production stages and LED volumes, that's really important to just know like, hey, what fits in the stage and what's gonna be on the screen and where's that line gonna have to be drawn, and making sure you can fit everything onto stage is pretty important.
And in addition, it's like Previs animation can be used to control motion control cameras or motion control rigs. So if you have a giant robot, but you've only built like the top half of it, you can put that on a motion base and use the Previs animation to rock the actor around inside like a partial version. Again, we didn't really do that much on Apes here, but that's one of the common things that visualization artists do on films. Yeah,
this film being so digital, they kind of either shot it very practically with, on set with their actors and stuff like that, or kind of recreated everything, so there wasn't really that need for the blend between, the stage volume. Like, they didn't really have to do any of that, so that's another reason we didn't quite have to get into that.
Yeah. Let's see, one of the things, since we're talking to a bunch of students, one of the things that we wanted to talk to you guys about is in the visualization world, how how you kind of comport yourself when you're dealing with other departments. Visualization is kind of in a special, weird little spot where in Previs, especially PitchViz, you're coming in and working on the movie when like the script is still being worked out, when there might be some storyboards, maybe there aren't any storyboards, the art department might not have even started up fully yet, or maybe like a portion of it has, so you'll ask like, oh, are there any designs for this like spaceship or something like that, and they'll say, no, just make it something like this and we'll design it later, and so there's a lot of creativity that goes into visualization because you kind of have to like make up stuff that they're gonna throw away, but there's part of that where you make it and sometimes they're like, well, this is really cool, and then the design ends up looking kind of like that, and when you watch the movie, you're like, oh, I kind of had a hand in the design of that.
But I kind of did,
Right, exactly.
And that goes for both like camera animation, stuff like that, like actually composing the shots, and then also on like the art department end, you need the spaceship or the prop or whatever, and you just kind of have to put a placeholder. But if you have the time to put a bit more thought into it, then that's where, they can just kind of pick it up and run with it. So it's about that starting point.
Yeah. But then further in, when the art department's full on, they're always handing you assets, and you're requesting assets. Like, oh, is this environment designed yet? Because we need to start doing previs in this environment, and we want it to be accurate, so we don't have to like constantly redo it as the designs get updated. And they'll send you Rhino files, and Wes, you want to talk through a little bit about what kind of files you receive?
Definitely, yeah. And I guess I'll take a step back first. Like, I'm a Gnomon graduate. I graduated 4.5 years ago, which was I jumped right into Halon, working on Pinocchio, and so it's awesome to be back. And it's actually my first time at the new campus, so this is pretty sweet. But going just directly into this kind of visualization, it kind of opens your eyes to the roles that are out there more than just being an artist and making assets for a film or a game or anything like that. I was in the 2-year program and went through the real-time, like the games track, and I thought that meant, I'll be working on video games probably. And then jumped right into like a remake of a classic film that I've known my whole life, and I've stuck with film ever since. So visualization is one of those roles that, like, if you're a bit more of a generalist, or even someone who is really specialized, there's so many roles out there that can just house you for for so long, and you can contribute to projects you never thought you would. I definitely didn't think I was going to be a presenter at my school, a few years after graduating, or get the opportunity to work on such big name things like this. And so it's been really neat. The pitch that Wes Ball had, brought to us originally, he was talking about the shots that, kind of made it into the film and some that didn't. And that early pitch is really what defined kind of our process for this film specifically, and then moving forward. And a big part of that was because Wes Ball is such an Unreal user, and he's so confident in it, that as soon as Unreal 5 came out, he was like, we're doing it in Unreal 5, and this is like 5.0, like alpha maybe, where none of the bugs had been sorted out. We didn't have a pipeline set up. And so it's just one of those punches you gotta roll with, and definitely, made it work. And it's easy to kind of forget and just see the results and be like, it was such an upgrade to Unreal 4, and think about all the good sides of it. But we didn't have access to like nanite on foliage, and there's so much foliage in this film.
Yeah, that's right.
Lumen was still quite buggy, and there's just so many quality of life improvements over the last few years that we've gotten accustomed to, that when we chatted in Seattle at Unreal Fest about the same process, we were kind of recalling like all the little hurdles that we had to to get over just to kind of update our pipeline and fit into this new role. But as far as the virtual asset department goes, that's lead VAD artist. The virtual asset department just handles any asset that comes our way. So that's environments, props, characters, and a lot of that is tailored around the real-time kind of rendering pipeline through Unreal Engine. And so some of the things that we got to kind of make for this project specifically was a bunch of ape characters that were all templated off the same base mesh, essentially, where we made kind of one default chimp. Yeah. And all of our characters came from that, and so they all shared UVs and often textures, and then we kind of just morphed them into different proportions and adjusted the textures a little bit, sometimes in engine and sometimes a little more bespokely, I guess.
Because we had worked on Postvis for War for the Planet of the Apes, at that point, Weta had given us their topology so that we could like match their characters, and but in going on to the next movie, they didn't have their topology yet. They were still designing the characters, and so we had used the topology from the third Apes film on this fourth Apes film, as kind of our starting point, but then we gave
Yeah.
them a major upgrade with dynamic fur in Unreal in real time.
One of those upgrades that definitely was a bit more of a headache in the early versions of the program. Just became so much more accessible, and we were able to use strand-based hair systems instead of cards to achieve just such a higher level of fidelity just in Previs, almost out of the box. Once we get it set up for the template ape, it kind of propagates to characters really easily and makes so many of the shots just look that much better.
When it comes to, I'll get back into like when it comes to working with other departments, there are sometimes some politics that you have to kind of navigate. Because you get brought on some shows very early, sometimes you get brought on and all the art's done and they're like, no, we just need to previs this one sequence, and like figure everything out for stunts or something like that, and they already have character designs, they already have everything that they essentially need to give you something to make something that looks like their thing. But as I had mentioned earlier, sometimes you're making up a lot of stuff. And so one of the ways that you kind of comport yourself, when you're dealing with a bunch of different people in the movie and pre-production, is just to be very respectful to, you get art department stuff, which I imagine a lot of you guys are kind of heading in that direction with concept art and stuff, that kind of stuff lands at your door sometimes, and when it's always awesome when it does, because you're like, okay, that is what it is supposed to look like. I'm gonna make that. Versus, oh yeah, it's got like a blue cape and stuff. We're doing some art, but you can't see it yet or something. And so it's like all about just kind of, like being respectful, pitching ideas. That's one thing with visualization as you kind of get into it is you can take kind of a back seat and just listen to the director on what they want. But a lot of visualization is, I have an idea, but it's not like a shot-by-shot, like complete vision. And so you're the people that are helping to realize that vision, and your version of that vision is going to be taken on by the production crew and then the visual effects crew later on, and those guys all have ideas, and so it'll like change through the entire course of the movie. And so whether you're doing Previs, Postvis, which happens a little bit later, and we'll talk more about that. It's always like this collaborative process, and so you're fitting into a role. You have some creative kind of freedom. You have some creative input, and you have the freedom to like pitch ideas, which is a really fun thing to do. And I feel like you have more freedom to do that the earlier you get in. And that's why Previs is so fun. It's because you're like brought on very early.
And the better you know the director, some of you guys have been working with Wes Ball a very long time, and so just knowing how everybody works and their likes and dislikes and kind of what they're into definitely help with knowing kind of where that line is, where to pitch your ideas and where to just take it back. So you can tell Wes is very easy to read as far as when he's very excited about something and when he maybe doesn't like something so much. So not too difficult on that end. But I'm sure as you work with different productions and different leads and stuff like that, you'll learn where that line is.
Yeah, and that's another cool thing about visualization is that you end up working with people who are pretty high up, like above the line people, not actors and stuff most of the time, but you're talking directly to the director. The director's, this is pre-COVID a little bit, poking their head over your shoulder. Oh, it would be so cool if that was a push-in. You're like, oh, okay, and make it a push-in. Or you're like, I was thinking it would be cool as a dolly, and he looks at it and he's like, maybe, and there's like collaboration there. And sometimes there's like really direct collaboration if you're using a virtual camera or something where they're putting their solid stamp on it. Let's see, and then sometimes you work with the director of photography. If they are brought on early enough, they have a very, it's their job to make the movie, like to have the movie look the way it does. And so when they get involved, they they can see your sequence. They're like, you know what? Let's combine these 2 shots and let's make these 3 shots like one big crane shot, and we don't need that anymore. But on this movie, the cinematographer was named Jula, and he came up to the table. We were working on the Marauder attack when all the bad apes are like burning down the village, and we were working on a bunch of ideas based on some boards where it was like, some Marauder apes are going to run by and like light the house on fire, like the roof on fire, and so we were like animating all these kind of disparate parts and trying to find like a one-er camera that could move through and be exciting. And the meeting that we presented that to the director, the cinematographer had also on his side in Unreal done like a little Unreal Previs scene, and so we showed ours, he showed his, and we were like, which one are they going to choose? But it ended up that it was like, well, let's use his camera, obviously. We like took his camera, and then it was like, okay, what beats? Because in his, he just had like run cycles on apes and stuff, things kind of sliding around in a very dynamic, very exciting scene. But like, what were the apes doing if they're not just like in a run cycle? And so then that's when we were like, okay, well, let's do this beat with like the guy getting zapped right at the beginning of the sequence. That's gonna happen right at the beginning of the sequence instead of like kind of in the middle. And then there's a scene where our main character gets like kind of lassoed and dragged for a little bit. That was in our animation, but it wasn't in Jula's, and Wes was like, oh, find a place to get that in there. And so it was like this highly collaborative process to kind of take his thing, chop a middle of it out, get a beat in there, but then eventually meet up with his camera again, and then build out like what exactly is going on in the staging of this whole scene.
Yeah, and I could take a sec to talk about kind of the environment work on the asset side as well. Where we're talking about the village and stuff like that. For visualization, a lot of the times you are kind of just starting with very little, and they're saying, we're working. It's going to be the village, and they maybe have one piece of concept art for it, and I think that's what we started with pretty early. And then eventually they get around to kind of scouting out real locations, especially for the places they'll shoot on location. They go and scout it and then take a bunch of reference info. And because it's such a digital movie, Weta was very involved from the very beginning to help just plan everything out. And another one of the kind of higher ups we get to work with is the visual effects supervisor, and that's a very cool experience as well. It's as much a celebrity as like the director for people in our line of work in a lot of cases, and so cool to see that as well. But they're the ones kind of they usually do like a scan of the environment pretty early on, so that you can get a digital recreation of just the scale and make sure cameras are going to be accurate when you get to set. And so that's gets more important as you go down the line to kind of recreate things one-to-one. We'll get a little bit more into that in the Postvis section. We'll talk about it a little later. But to start, they kind of just start with concept art, maybe a scout and a scan, a pretty low-res one comparatively. And then from there, it's our job to just recreate something that's going to run effectively. And every time they kind of come up with a new camera angle, you got to maybe fill in that part of the environment as well. And you're starting with the script and maybe storyboards too, so you kind of know where the coverage is going to be, but it's a pretty dynamic process, as is the characters and the props and other stuff like that. But the sets become such a focal point because so much can fit into them. So we spend a lot of time, I think probably the majority of the time, on environments on the the VAD side of things. And that's kind of where the most notes come in as well, especially on a movie like this, where the apes are climbing around towers and stuff like that, and they need a path, a branch to grab onto. The egg climb scene at the very beginning, which we started with on the pitch viz, evolved so many times, so many iterations where we've got different levels for kind of different setups for them to do different moves, and we kind of stitch it all together and see what works, and just dozens of iterations on the layout and how the apes are going to get from A to B, and then thankfully less so on this environments that they scout a little bit more and have to have a real camera on set. They figured that out a little more simply. But yeah, so even in this title card, you know, this is from that opening egg climb scene, and that's one of my favorite shots from the film, which came to us from concept art, and we knew it was going to have to slot into that sequence somewhere, and then it ends up pretty faithfully in the film, kind of as far as composition goes, looking a lot like that, and that's a really fun feeling to be in theaters. And we were talking just before this, it's strange to like not have your final pixels up there, but to feel so involved in the process and planning and influencing kind of how the end result's going to be. I guess on the more technical side, you know, we're using Unreal Engine. We're able to use a lot of their procedural foliage tools now to scatter so many, you know, plants and trees and everything all over this destroyed assets. We've kind of got our own library of custom shaders, but I just wanted to call out, like, we've got this moss function that kind of grows moss on top of assets procedurally, and so it's very easy to kind of bring everything together like that. And that's one of those things that I honestly like almost associate when I saw this scene in theaters, was like just that level of moss that we put on everything and like overgrowth felt like, you know, we were the ones to kind of cue what degree that was, and it felt like my work was on screen, even though they had to remake everything anyway. It felt like you know, all the little details you get to put in when you're trying to realize these assets and environments as quickly as possible, but also as detailed as possible, and a lot of those little details kind of carry through the production. It's really rewarding to see.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, with Previs, with Postvis a little less so, but with Previs, it's you're working so early in the production, designing sequences, like whole sequences. So sometimes as an artist, you're like, oh, like I got like 5 shots in there or something. But sometimes you're like, oh, this like for 2 minutes, that's all my work. Like every single shot is my shot. And to watch the movie, sometimes like your scene's just not there, and you're like, well, that sucks. But sometimes you see it and it's like, oh yeah, they used like one of my shots and the other one looks kind of like my shot, but it's not really. And then there's other times where it's like, every single shot is what I did. And it's like, there's actors in there now, and there's like visual effects in there now, and it's kind of a deja vu almost, because you're looking at your work, but it looks completely different and looks way better. And that's thanks to like all of the people that when you were done with your job, started their job to film the movie, to do all the VFX for it. And obviously the actors and everything who've changed things around, but in every one of those cases, apart from I suppose the one where your scene just got cut, it's a cool experience no matter how like different it is by the time you see it in the theater.
I mean, just our pipeline throughout this whole project, not all of the sequences went completely from the Previs stage through the Postvis stage. Some kind of just stayed in Previs, and that's all they needed out of it. And then some we didn't need to Previs, and they would go shoot it, and then it come to us for Postvis. But the human hunt sequence was one that did go through the whole pipeline. And so, yeah, they came to us with the sequence and had the 2 locations scouted, and the 1 environment they scanned. And it was kind of a new process for me, bringing point cloud data directly into Unreal Engine. It does render out points like that. It's kind of a very different way to work than working with geometry, but definitely got the job done for us to kind of start placing cameras and thinking about shots and stuff like that, while I was also working on converting it to geometry. And so, the important part for that was just the accuracy, because they're going to go shoot it in person, that the more information they get, the better, so that their shoot goes, more smoothly. And so the point cloud kind of ensures that it's going to be as accurate as possible without really being there to start. And it was kind of a new way to work, but it worked out really well. And the geometry that we generated from it kind of formed like the banks of the river, and then informed also where the water line usually lies. and then the kind of the trees that are along the bank as well. Yeah, all to a very high degree of accuracy. And so to replace all that with geometry, we kind of do a solve, and the banks are kind of all you keep out of it, and then just use the rest of the points as reference, where we replace kind of our own water planes, and that's kind of where we spawn like our Niagara particle effects as the action is taking place. And then kind of hand place the trees that are like really important, because as a camera kind of runs down the river, it's either going to get in the way of the shot or the cameraman. So yeah, hand placing all that. And then the second part of it is kind of integrating it to the greater environment, which doesn't need to be replicated with such accuracy because it's more just the background.
There were a couple of different challenges when it came to the human hunt, as you will see. And you saw a little bit of the previs, where it was a bunch of zebras in the water, running, apes and humans running. There were the feral apes, the apes with no language capability, and they look kind of like cave people running through the water. There was like a lot of crowd work, and some of the things that we had to do to achieve that was we wanted to be able to control where all the zebras were in Maya, which is where we do most of our animation work. Not all of it on this show, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we didn't, which was the eagle and the zebras. So the zebras we downloaded from the marketplace, and they already had a zebra animation packs to them. So they had a bunch of different animation files for like idle 2, run, jump, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the zebras, we've kind of got our animation pack, and then the apes and the humans, we did animations, but also some motion capture for them, right?
Some motion capture. Yes, and that's one of the fun things about doing previs is sometimes, or if you're me, on almost every show, I try to get in the mocap suit and act out as much of the motion that I can to give out to the animators to use. And so on this one, we had a mocap supervisor named Jarrell Hall, and he and I got in the suits and both just acted like apes for hours, and or humans and apes. And on Human Hunt, there was a lot of running in the water, but there's no water involved, so it's like running trying to make it feel like your feet are dragging, or that you're like high knee stepping the way that you do to try to move faster in the water. And for the apes, it was all sorts of things like sliding down a broken skyscraper and reaching out, trying not to fall, and or like running down to see where your friend is. And
riding a horse.
Riding a horse, yeah. So like being an ape on like just like this kind of stool, and just kind of doing this, and on one of them, we had the ape get like knocked off, and our mocap supervisor was a stuntman also, and so he was like, "Do you want me to teach you how to do a fall off a horse?" I was like, "Yes," and so he showed me how to do the roll. And we mocapped it, and those motion capture experiences, if you're the kind of person who loves kind of acting or playing out like things in the previs world, you're capturing motion for previs, not for the final movie. So there's just like a way more freedom, and like you don't have to worry about like whether it's like got a little jittery or if your hand markers disappeared or something during your roll. Because you can kind of clean it up in a way that's good enough, and then you can keep going. So there's a lot of ape motion, and I will say that standing like this for hours, as well as doing like stunts and stuff, ooh, legs get sore. And then also in this sequence that we'll show, there were the stunt team had done some stunt viz, which is basically them filming themselves doing stunts and putting like effects and stuff on it. But what Wes wanted was to make sure that we saw that with our digital previs characters, so that we can kind of plan out the camera move for while we were there. And so stunt team sent us their stunt videos. We rotomated the scene to match like the timing and the speed at which they're getting pulled by wires and stuff in our Previs assets, and put in a bunch of splashes and stuff. And we also had a bunch of bird assets that again were, I think, mostly off the marketplace, the Unreal Marketplace, that you're able to get like a fly cycle, but then you control where, like you can either animate them completely in Unreal, which is doable. It's definitely doable, and it's getting better at every release of Unreal. But back then, this was like 2-3 years ago at this point. Like the animation controls and stuff weren't as refined as they are now, and so a lot of our work would be like animating just like a some prop like a gun or something in the water, and then and like flying away, and in Unreal attaching a bird to it and putting the flapping cycle, like the idle cycle, and it blends into a flapping cycle to get bird animation in there. Wes, do you want to talk about the all the LiDAR stuff and working with that for the Proximus encampment?
One of them is the encampment that all the apes kind of end up in later on, which is kind of a bunch of individual sets that aren't necessarily shot on a location. They're built by the art department, and those are examples of environments that we'll get scans of as well. And these will be a little more accurate, a little more high quality, because these are the ones they'll kind of be sending to Weta as well to really polish up. And so we get some good data off of those, and our job with these deliveries, as well as, I mean, pretty much anything we'll get from the art department, is kind of what you'll find in like your real-time asset class of like taking something that's modeled really, really well, a scan at that, like level of detail with high-res photos for textures and stuff like that, and converting it into something that is going to run in engine at a friendly rate where you have a bunch of apes running around and you need your camera to render out pretty quickly, and we're on a tight deadline and stuff like that. So it's kind of that same process, just with whatever you end up getting delivered, whether it's a whole set like some of the pieces here. They built the whole bunker door with some of the kind of cliff face around it and a big yard in front of it. But that was different than kind of the set at the top of the cliff that's nearby, or the interior of the ship that's right next to it. They have all these different environments that they'll scan and send over, and then we kind of integrate. And what's cool about this yard specifically, or this set, was that it was so many different set pieces that all were so close together that on the engine side, we were able to have them all kind of in the same space, and just it makes it work so much more logically. And it's pretty cool to be able to play around just at any point that we know they're going to have a scene, is just move everything over there. The camera's to the other end where their location is going to be. But yeah, as far as receiving those are, I think, some of the most fun things to work on, is when you get those kind of later deliveries from art departments, or that they've already shot on set, and that's where you really start to feel like you're working on the final product, because you're seeing kind of where they shot, and then they also, I think, end up being the best looking Previs shots, because you get the actual set that they shot on, and then you get to extend it and comp that all together. And for a brief moment, it really is your work on the screen before it just moves on and they polish it all up.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the transition from Previs to Postvis. So Previs, it's like all digital. You're creating the edit basically by generating shots and working with the director or the VFX supervisor mostly to get those things working. Sometimes there's like an editor in Previs that will come in and edit this, help edit the scene. But in Postvis, they've already shot their movie, and now they have a bunch of plates, and they want to get an idea of what is going to be like added in CG into the plate before they send it off to the visual effects house. And Previs's kind of purpose is to plan for your shoot, so that when you get to your shoot, everybody knows what they're shooting. Everybody knows like how many setups there are, what kind of stunts there are, those kinds of things, and also the creatively finding the story. And it's so expensive to film big action scenes on sets that Previs helps basically give you a plan, so you don't have some sort of catastrophe where two departments thought that you guys were doing something different, and there's delays and that kind of thing. So ultimately, like there's a creative aspect of Previs, there's a planning aspect of Previs, but ultimately it's kind of a financial aspect to make sure that your costs don't go high because you didn't plan out your scenes. And Postvis has a very similar function to basically play around with a super fast iteration time to get kind of creatively on the screen what the director is envisioning before you spend the big bucks with a visual effects house. But that means that Postvis is essentially like your first pass of VFX, and then you end, and then it's done, kind of a thing. Which, as a generalist and somebody who went to school for like visual effects, animation, and filmmaking, being like, I'm not really sure which one I want to do. Previs is kind of like the perfect place for that because it's about storytelling, but you're using your visual effects skills to do it. And you're doing it fast, and you're not worried about like it looking perfect. You're worried about it telling the story and making sure that like the filmmakers are getting what they need out of it. So, just like in a visual effects pipeline, we track our cameras, 3D track them. There might be some shots where you don't need to 3D track, so you just do tracking in After Effects to just comp in some dust or something like that. But as you see on this film, there's a lot of 3D apes running around and other animals. So, yeah, most shots are 3D tracked. Our animation goes through Maya. We get our tracks in there. We line it up to the environment that Wes's team has built. Kind of make sure that it's right, or because it's Postvis, right enough. Like if it's almost there, but just it's going to take all day to do it. You're like, well, I took half a day, and it basically looks like it's right. The whole point of Postvis is save money, so you stop there and you make sure you tell your story with that shot. We still use motion capture, and in the scene that you're going to see soon, again, it was me and my buddy Jarrell doing an entire day's worth of mocap shoots of us pulling on ropes, pretending like we're getting zapped by people with electrical prods, and falling down on the ground, acting like we're dying. And literally like probably 6 hours straight of that. And the mocap turnaround that we do is literally like you stand up, you're like, okay, go again. Because the whole point is to get like as much as you can in as little amount of time, because it's about speed, not about the quality. And then in Unreal, it's like you have your environment. You've built out a crowd of apes that you've retargeted motion capture onto, and so it's all about lighting, set extension renders, for when the blue screen or no blue screen just kind of marks the end of the set, and you have to like roto out where the blue screen, kind of should have been if everything was peachy. You get all that stuff out, you place in your Unreal rendered backgrounds, and you do normal compositing work on it, but again, it's about speed, so it's like you get it to the point where it's not distracting, and then you move on to your next shot.
Yeah, I think you'll hear quite often from teachers or professionals that the last 5% or so is really what kind of makes a shot, and that it also takes a lot more than 5% of the time, and so that's kind of, we work up until that point and then kind of hand it off, and it's good enough. Yeah, I mean, it's all about just delivering the vision to not just the director, but to everybody involved, so everybody's on the same page. And you can accomplish that with storyboards or with grayscale renders, the same way, but every production works differently, and some people really just need to see it in front of them and care a lot more about maybe setting up the lighting and such early, and that really informs how the story is going to play out for them, and so it all kind of comes back to doing it as quickly as possible.
Like one of the first tasks we had was, we know we want a huge crowd of apes. But how big is that crowd? Does that mean like 100 apes? Does that mean like 10,000 apes? It was like what, just visually in these plates, what looks right, what feels right. And so we did like, well, this is 300, this is 700, this is like 1,500. We sent that off, and they were like, 1,500, way too much. And I was like, all right, well, that's our first answer. And then it was like, okay, well, actually, how about like your apes are kind of spread out really far. How about we like kind of close them in like a concert where everybody's kind of shoulder to shoulder. We closed them in, they're like, okay, now we need like a couple hundred more apes. And so then, and we were able to build out in Unreal a pretty cool system where we did animation loops through mocap or keyframe, and had those just all as animations, so you could like grab a crowd of apes, place them all in their like kind of apey A pose, and then you're like, this guy's gonna be hopping up and down, this guy's gonna be like cheering, this guy, you assign them all like a loopable animation, and then you duplicate those guys and put them over here and rotate them, and you duplicate them again, and really quickly, within like a day or something, we had this this fully customizable, fully Unreal-based kind of crowd that we could adjust or switch people off or switch out animations very quickly if the director's like, oh, these guys, they're not cheering, they should be like very solemn. There was a group of these female apes on this bridge in the movie, and they're like, no, those guys aren't cheering, they're just gonna be like these monks. And so, so we did some monk mocap and threw it on those ones. And then I wanted to talk about compositing. Just like with all the other things I'm talking about, it's about speed. And so some of the tools that we used, we use After Effects. Other houses use other things like Nuke and stuff, but generally I feel like the After Effects is like kind of the main compositing tool in the Viz world. And some of the tools that we used on Kingdom that we'd kind of tested out, like on, it was on Aquaman 2. We tested out RotoBrush, and it was like kind of in its early stages and kind of difficult to work with, and we were like, no, just go back to Mocha. But on Kingdom, we tested it out again, and it was like, oh, this actually works now. And so, like, I don't remember going back into Mocha on Kingdom at all. And so some of the tools, RotoBrush is an artificial or a neural network tool, but it's one of the ones that like is actually useful on a show to do a specific task that you hate doing, and it does it faster, and like you as an artist just have this tool to work with. And so there's like a couple small examples of the use of like AI kind of tools that are actually like benefit you in your job. But the way it is like they just feel like a better version of the tool. So we used RotoBrush. Content-aware fill is a huge thing for painting out things. When you're compositing, and in Postvis, there's it's all the same stuff that's in frame, like a cameraman over there, somebody in a blue screen suit or whatever. And what used to take a long time, and at least for Postvis, too long to make look really good, just looked kind of crappy, and then you'd put an ape over it, but there's like this big gray blob behind the ape. Nowadays, in like an hour or something, you can have like a pretty decent looking plate that actually looks good. And then after all that, it's like really about rendering out passes in Unreal. You can do this in Maya using render layers, with passes, but we're using Unreal on most of our shows. So rendering out all your render passes and just doing the traditional kind of comp work. But some of the other things that we did on this show that were kind of unique was, again, with Wes Ball, because he is an Unreal guy, he didn't stop his tendency to jump in the middle of the night into our work and play around. And so there would be mornings where he's like, you're working on this scene that's like mostly CG, and it's like, it's kind of working, but I just got in there, and I just stayed up late, and I like laid out the scene for you. And so it was like just a bunch of cameras on an ape crowd that he had made. It's for a scene at the end of the movie, kind of up on this cliff. And it was like, this camera's a boom, this one's a push in, this one's kind of in orbit. But he's not like he's not spending time animating the whole thing. So he would pass all his cameras off to us. We would go in and either use mocap, keyframe, or a blend of the two to create the crowd and give it its movement and its life, but all based on his cameras, and then render those out. So So it's, again, that collaboration is really fun. And because you are moving so fast, you're rendering shots out every day that you started on that day. And to have somebody who comes in and kind of helps you out, like does some of your work for you, is pretty darn cool. And it's cool to have a tool that's collaborative like that. We did a couple other things that were cool. He color corrected his own plates and then passed them off to us to add apes to it. So there's a scene where they're walking through the bottom of the cliff and the waves are like splashing up against the apes. He had like found some or captured some like nature photography of this cliff area, and he like just spent all this time like getting it perfect. And he's like, okay, now use this, and I want the apes right there. And so we've animated little apes there, yeah. And so that sequence was really like, that was one of our last sequences that we worked on before we wrapped on Postvis, and he was still in there noodling
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you can kind of tell, like the further down the pipeline you get, hopefully if everything goes well, the asset department is not needed as much because you've moved into rendering and comping it all together. So hopefully everything has not changed and you don't need to make new assets or change the set or anything like that. Yeah, the natural progression is like, you kind of spin up a lot with the previs because you need a starting point, and then as they nail things down, the art department might send you some things or the scout locations, stuff like that. But then as you get further and further into post-viz, like I'll wrap a lot earlier than the rest of the viz team will to take it through the end.
Yeah.
And that's our presentation.
Thank you all so much for that fantastic presentation. Okay, so we're going to get into our Q&A. If you have not been part of a Gnomon Q&A before, here's how it works. You'll raise your hand, and then I kind of keep like a mental cue of who's going to be asking questions and so on and so forth. And this fancy mic that I'm holding right now will be the microphone that you use to ask your question. So, who has a question for our lovely guests here this wonderful evening? Anybody can start. Oh, fantastic. So we'll go here, and then I'll move over here to the middle. Here you are.
Hello. Just want to say thank you for visiting Gnomon and then giving another talk regarding production visualization of this project. You've spoken deeply about like how involved Wes Ball was, and I wanted to know, like in comparison, like I guess like a two-part question. One, if you had access to your scenes, did you just share also like direct like files to your pipeline with the director, and he just was able to remote in and work on the UA scenes? Mm-hmm. And the other one was more of a broad of like, what is it like to work with a director who's way more technical with Unreal, and like he often emphasized the importance of like reducing the game of telephone on a project. So like, would he give direct notes to like some of the artists, and then you just pass that down? Like I was wondering how that process goes.
Yeah. So. I guess on a technical level, to answer the first part of the question, in Unreal we use Perforce. It's a version control system, and so on shows where you're using Perforce, sometimes they're like, "Hey, can we get the director access to your Perforce?" And so, which is always like a little scary, but but we just talk through like kind of like, these are where our files are. Here's how you should deal with them. Like copy them, put them in here, or whatever. We figure out a system. And then he, like in the morning, was like, "Hey, my files are here. Like, go check them out, make them look cool," that kind of thing. Let's see. And then the second part of your question was dealing with like the difference between a technical director and like a non-technical. Yeah. So it's true. Yeah. When people are highly technical, or if you're in like a virtual production kind of situation where you have a virtual camera that's like motion tracked or like on your iPad or something, you can have directors who aren't technically minded be able to put like something in their hand that has a view of what their camera is seeing in Unreal with your animation in it, and they will pretty quickly be like, "Oh, I get it. This is a camera, and I'm looking at my set and my characters." and they can record cameras, or they can just be like, yeah, like it starts out looking, you know, in this like 2-shot, and when he walks over there, the camera's going to come over here, and it's going to be a close-up, something like that. And so even though like you don't record it sometimes, you're like, okay, those are my notes, and you can like kind of just A, B, you know, and then animate your camera in between, and then, but I would say on most movies that we work on, the director isn't quite as involved as that. And it is verbal notes, drawings, you know, in meeting, or written notes, drawings, and in meetings, you know, going through shots and him like, you know, drawing over the frame, oh, fix this, make this up here, you know, those kinds of things. And sometimes you do get into like kind of a telephone game. And so the kind of, are oftentimes, I would say maybe 50-50, maybe it's a little bit different than that. It would be like you're talking with the director, and then but most of the other times you're talking with the visual effects supervisor, and there you're like kind of go-to person, and they talk to the director. So you work with the visual effects supervisor on the sequence, they present it to the director, get notes, bring it back to you. So there's lots of different ways that can kind of work out, where the director, like sometimes you have a director review where he comes in and he tells you all the notes, and then like he's gone for a month and he comes back. Sometimes you're talking to them every day, and sometimes you never talk to them. So there's just kind of a range, and on each project you kind of get a lay of the land and, you know, kind of realize what your part in it is on this show, and kind of just operate from there.
There's also, I think, like the nature of our work is that Previs, you know, kind of isn't for every movie, but it's for the more digital or more technical ones. And so I think most directors coming to us with a lot of work are kind of expecting to be in that world of like on the technical side of things. And so they naturally, I think, are just already more comfortable with it. So we don't work with, you know, directors that are like against doing any visual effects, you know, or anything like that. Because obviously just the nature of our work is for a lot of technical
bigger
stuff,
budget
so
stuff,
yeah.
mostly. But it's not completely true. I feel like, especially these days with LED walls and smaller budgets, you know, now that with the strikes and everything, that there are smaller projects doing previs, and it's a little bit different because it's tighter. It has to be faster. Maybe you can't make it look as good as you want it to. Yeah, so it like, I mean, it really is. Every movie's a little different.
Hello. Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I hope this film finally wins the Oscar that it deserves.
That would be fun.
I hope so too.
Yeah. Just a question for Postvis. Do you have department of it is just compositing, or do you prefer them to also have a generalist skill set?
Yeah. We don't have a department that's just compositing. We generally like to have generalists who can basically start their shot and end their shot. But that doesn't mean that that's like a hard rule. In the early days of adopting the engine, there were people who just did Unreal stuff because everybody else was like, I know how to do Maya, but this engine thing seems crazy. And over the years, I mean, we started using the engine in 2015, so it's been like 10 years now, and so the people who've been kind of in this space this whole time know Unreal really well, and as well as Maya, and as well as After Effects. So there's some specialization, like with assets, you know, not all asset artists can do every step of Postvis, and there's some people who are just like really good at tracking, and maybe they do a bit of compositing, and it's like, well, how about you just do all the tracks while we do all the prep work for this, you know? So that one is also, it's like, I mean, it's a little bit like the Wild West, where it's just like, whatever works. But yeah, I would say that in general, on a Postvis show, if you don't know one of the steps, in a couple weeks, you'll know how to do it.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I had two questions. One is about the previous part, and especially specifically blocking camera and action. I was curious how much of the process is you interpreting a storyboard that's like already been sort of created, and how much of it is you sort of going free form and trying things out? And in that regard, how do you recruit artists that are specifically like tailored to that? Because that seems like a very kind of sort of creative, abstract thing, and I can imagine a lot of people are great at that, but some are like not so good, and like I'm not sure there's educational programs that are catered to that specifically. So it seems like might be a hard thing to find, the talented people to do.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, again, like somewhere like 50-50, you get storyboards and they're like, we like the boards, just do the boards. And then once you do the boards, I feel like this always happens with the boards, is boards are still, even if there's implied camera moves or very specifically implied camera moves, but once you start seeing it move, and with movement comes timing, like things just inevitably start changing. Like the moment directors see their storyboards move, they're like, oh, actually let's change this shot to be this, and let's combine these two shots, and we don't need that shot anymore. Like it's, I mean, kind of like if you were staging like a play or something, you have the script, and then the actors get involved, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy had a cool idea to walk around that character, and that kind of thing. So storyboards often, I mean, one thing that's really nice about storyboards is it's got a clear vision. You can start on it right away. You can get a first version out really fast, and then from there, essentially the storyboards kind of fade into the past, and you just kind of keep moving forward, even though like all or 80% of the shots are basically the shots from the boards. But there's plenty of times where we got script pages and the director's going to give you a kickoff for a couple hours to describe like what he or she thinks the scene is, and then you kind of have freedom. And some people are like, I don't know, just give me something cool. And you're like, all right. And some people are like, no, it's really specifically, we found this, this intersection. He's going to do his like car skid on that intersection. So you need to like make sure you scan that intersection and make, so it's like every director or visual effects supervisor has like their own style. And so I do feel like one of the times that is the most fun is when it's like, here's some ideas, show me what you guys think is cool. But obviously that one starts with less form, takes a little bit longer probably to like get to.
And as far as interpreting the boards goes, like I think our pipeline is typically like the leads will take kind of the main blocking and then split those up into shots and then kind of dole those out to other artists. So yeah. I think that's something if you don't have to start that way in terms of interpreting the boards, somebody else's vision. You start more with a shot that's kind of been set up digitally already for you, and then you get better at that, and I'm sure that develops your eye for then interpreting the boards and like kind of how the camera's gonna have to act.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to, I guess, education about previs, like I definitely didn't think that I would be in previs. I was like, oh, visual effects, I wanted to animate the next Gollum, and I kind of thought of previs as like just lower quality, like, oh, like it looks bad, it must be bad artists, or something like that. And then I like landed a job in previs, and within like a week I was like, oh no, this is filmmaking. It's filmmaking, but with visual effects tools. And you're doing it on films, which was my passion, and so in my mind, like I never like I didn't go. I guess I did go to a film school, but it really is. It's like watching films, seeing how sequences are cut together, seeing how camera moves work. Figuring out directors that you really like and styles that you like and styles that you don't like. But one of the things with previs is you got to be really adaptive about styles because you're working with somebody who's going to be setting the style for you. Or you're going to be presenting shots and he's like, no, I don't want it to be that cutty. And you're like, oh, I guess I can't make a really cutty sequence, even though I really like cutty sequences because you need to kind of encapsulate the director's vision. So you have to be really adaptive there. But yeah, it's like, my suggestion is like watch movies, the movies you like, try to figure out why you like them from a visual standpoint and from a kind of pacing and timing standpoint in regards to scenes, not in regards to the whole movie, because with Previs, it's very rare. I mean, there's a couple times that we've done it, but it's very rare that you work on a whole movie. It's usually this big, expensive action sequence and that big, and the third act, and that kind of thing. There are movies. Pinocchio was basically the entire movie, but most of the time it's action scenes or big VFX scenes, and those are scenes that I love. And so so like watching those, kind of figuring out like how is it clear that like when the Hulk jumps up from the street onto the building and smashes a bad guy, that you like know exactly what's going on. And it's about composition, it's about timing, it's about how the camera's moving, and like what shot did it cut from, what shot does it cut to, that kind of thing.
Hey guys, so you guys briefly touched on post-strike Hollywood and budgets changing and stuff like that, and I was wondering if you could dig a little deeper on how like the need for previs might expand or change in the future, like more films coming to you, different kinds of films coming to you, like stuff like that.
Yeah, hopefully it's about to change, that it'll pick up, that there'll be a lot more movies being made, and that a lot of them will have the, the budgets and the theme to kind of go our way.
It's, I guess it's been a painful couple of years, but we're still making movies. But the movies do feel like they're a little different, like the big budget VFX movies that in like 2018, 2019 were were all over the place. Those movies, I guess, during the pandemic kind of resurged a little bit, but yeah, for the last little bit, it's they're just not making as many of those. And I have my own ideas about like why, like with the impacts of the strikes and of the streaming, kind of the streaming crash and stuff. But who knows if any of that is super accurate. But I guess some of the ways that I feel like Previs is changing is that we're seeing a lot more TV doing Previs. But they still have TV budgets and TV schedules, so smaller teams, faster productions, that kind of thing.
And I think that is getting more accessible, like just in general, even if it's not Previs specifically, but there's a lot of technology that's just getting more user-friendly and more accessible on a smaller budget and faster and better. Yeah. So I think, there's a lot more tools out there, and visualization is just one of them that are definitely more accessible than ever. And so it's just kind of whether the productions are going to kind of go that way with it, I think.
Me again. You touched on it briefly regarding the storyboard question, but I was actually wondering, with some directors getting inspired when they go on set, design new shots. I was wondering, I've noticed Previs, like they seem to work on very specific sequences when there's gonna be a larger budget for. So how does that work if, like, let's say a director wants to add a new shot because they got inspired on the day of the set? Yeah,
I mean, they get inspired, they shoot a new shot, there's a new shot. Like it's like Previs is, I feel like there can be the perception that Previs is some sort of like plan that you get locked into, and maybe there's some like studio pressure or something that it's like, no, like this was our plan, stick to the plan kind of a thing. But you could see on the Human Hunt clip that like there were shots that were pretty much the same, and then there were shots that were like completely different or new shots. And if they, post-vis, which on these big movies, they usually post-vis the scenes they previs, unless it's all practical. But that's like basically, there's a new idea. This is like, we shot this, now we cut it together. And actually, I guess I didn't really talk about the editorial aspect of it. In post-vis, you're really supporting the editor. Because he or she are cutting together the movie, they watch it, they're like, there's just a blue screen here, can we get our Postvis team to put our ape crowd in? And you put the ape crowd in, and then you're like, oh, that's kind of nice. Maybe we can make this shot twice as long. So they send you a plate that's twice as long, and you have to redo the shot twice as long now. You give it back to them. So it's still that kind of that creative process, and I think that's one thing I love about it, is that is that you're kind of involved with so many different departments, and you're kind of touching a lot of things that like as a, like when I wanted to be like a character animator, that I would probably touch very few actual shots, and they would be my shots, but like I did the animation on them. But with Previs, you're like, well, that those 50 shots are kind of my shot, and so yeah, in Postvis, you help out the editor figure out if they need to just cut that scene. Like, oh, you know what? Now that we see some temp VFX in it, it's not working. Let's cut it, and that's the scene. Then you don't get to see your work in the movie, but by providing that work for them, they were able to make big creative decisions earlier before they spend millions of dollars in VFX and then decide to cut the scene.
And thankfully, starting with Previs and then moving into Postvis, like if they add a new shot, it's likely that the same background you're using for all the other shots is going to render just fine for that one as well. You're going to have to track the camera and get it into engine, but it's not like you're going to have to remake something brand new for it. So pretty easy once you kind of get a lot of that stuff locked down to then, I mean, yeah, the director can still play on set with what he wants to shoot and get inspired, but then you just kind of keep making shots.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. So you mentioned that you guys would search the marketplace for like assets and stuff. How do you decide like when to go look for assets? Is it like a difficulty thing or like for speed? And if so, if that let's say that artist is working on that specific scene, does it come out of like his pocket, or how does that work?
It definitely doesn't come out of their pocket.
No, it would be, I mean, like, it really is like this kind of complex, or this, not really complex, but it's like, we like when you start a show, it's like, oh, we need like a Suburban, and we need a tank, and we need 2 kinds of machine guns, and we need like an army guy. And you're like, well, we did that show with a tank that time, we did like the Suburban in that movie. And so like you start off the show just harvesting from other things that you've done before, because it's all about speed, and because the things that you're making are not actually going to show up on screen. They're like placeholders for everything that will be on the screen eventually. And so there's the harvesting part of it, and then there's the Unreal Marketplace, which has so much content for a very low price ultimately, compared to like how it was before the Unreal Marketplace, 10 or more years ago. And sometimes those assets are just look really good, and to make an asset look that good would take a certain number of hours or days, and so it's faster to just be like, well, I'll just buy it for $15 or whatever.
And a lot of time it's not right out of the box that it works. Maybe sometimes, if you've got the tank, but your film is set, present day, and it's a World War II tank or something like that. Yep. Maybe that's not a problem, or maybe you need to just make a couple adjustments, and that is the same for assets we get from the art department or from previous shows. A lot of it is just like assessing what you have or what you can find that is more efficient and cheaper and faster, and then just using that as a starting place, and so the time you do spend is like really well spent.
Yeah, and so there's there's the marketplace, but also like Turbo Squid and stuff. If there's an asset that we're just like, oh, that's going to take too long, but for like $200, it's on Turbo Squid, but it's untextured. It's like, well, we'll get that, hand it off to the Virtual Art Department. You guys UV and texture it, and break it apart so it's riggable, and if we need to put some like cloth on a sail or something like that.
And then we've got it for shows moving forward too. Like we're never going to throw something away. We want to keep it organized enough that we can find things for later, and that kind of goes into our processing. Like you said, when we're starting up a show of like, what do we have and what do we need to build ourselves.
And one thing though is that between like you get the movie where there's a bunch of tanks, you do that movie, and it's like 3 or 4 years before you do another movie with tanks, and you're like, oh yeah, we did that awesome tank back in the day. Let's bring it back, and you bring it back, and you're like, oh god, it looks so horrible. Let's just get a new tank and make a new tank.
Awesome. We got one more question for y'all right here.
What's up, guys? Congratulations on the Oscar. I wanted to ask you on Mouse Guard, how was working on that, and how was it working with mice, and why do you think it didn't get?
Oh, you were working on Mouse Guard, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Where were you?
Well, no, I worked on it, but I wanted to ask you, how was it working with mice, and also, you know, because I know it was like the Lord of the Rings kind of thing, but I just wanted to see your take on it, because it is a different visual, you know what I mean? And then why do you think it didn't happen?
I can't answer the question of like why it actually didn't happen, because I'm not like, you know, privy to all the decisions and stuff. But I can tell you that it was painful when they like all brought us into a room and were like, we're gonna shoot in 2 weeks, and we were like prepping to build teams to do the, you know, to process all the mocap, and because it was gonna be kind of like an Avatar thing where it was completely digital. All the mice were gonna be played by humans and mocap, and they were going to do facial, and they were, you know, it was just all this beautiful work. And they brought us into a room. They're like, guys, we're not making the movie anymore, and you guys have like 2 days left or whatever to like clean everything up. And it was like, it was such a heartbreak. But working on it was really amazing. It was, I mean, I guess I can't say too much about it, but there were giant battle scenes we were like halfway through doing. We had done some of the stuff that Wes released. You know, we had the giant turtles and you know, people flying on crows and like flight, you know, battle sequences and stuff. It was, I mean, like for the geek in me, I was like, this is the best thing I'm ever gonna do.
And I didn't get to work on that, unfortunately, but it's the legend around the office, but it's also been like kind of a blueprint for how we've worked kind of past that point.
That's true. It had a big influence on our
big
workflows.
productions. Yeah, both on the asset side and the animation side. Just filmmaking in general, I think that really like kind of solidified our pipeline.
Yeah,
you know?
and yeah, that's absolutely true. And look, on that show, we kind of rewrote our Maya to Unreal pipeline, so it's like it was just way better than it was before. And had, and that's what we still use today with improvements. But yeah, that was a big show. We had a huge team on it, very technical. We were collaborating. I mean, on that one, we were collaborating not only with the art department, but with the final VFX studio and with the team that was going to be in charge of capturing all the mocap during the shoot. We were getting access to the costumes, so we could model the costumes and put them on our Previs characters. It was pretty cool. And R.I.P.
Well, on that note, give it up one more time for our amazing presenters. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you at home. You're probably catching this at a later date, but we appreciate you watching this awesome stream. If you're curious about what Gnomon can do for you or anything about Gnomon, please visit us at gnomon.edu. And that's it. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.